Captain Alexandra "Alex" Mitchell sat in her car at the entrance to Fort Meade, Maryland, one of the most secure military installations in the country. It was 6:47 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise. She was about to start what would be the most important day of her military career. For the past 3 years, Alex had worked in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. Her work was classified. Her projects were classified. Even her job title was classified. To the casual observer, she was simply someone who worked in an office building on base. To people who didn't have security clearances, she was invisible. To people who did have security clearances, she was one of the most important people working in military cyber defense. Today, she was scheduled to brief the commanding general of United States Cyber Command on a project that had taken 18 months to develop. The project involved identifying and shutting down a sophisticated cyber weapon that had been developed by a hostile nation. The project was still classified at the highest level. Only about 15 people in the entire military structure knew about it. Alex was one of them. But first, she had to get through the gate. The guards at the gate of Fort Meade were thorough. That was their job. They checked ID. They ran background checks. They made sure that only authorized personnel were allowed on base. They took their job seriously because the security of the installation depended on them. Alex pulled up to the guard booth. The guard who approached was a young man, maybe 23 or 24, a lance corporal who looked like he'd been at this post for about 6 months. "Good morning," Alex said, smiling. "Captain Alexandra Mitchell, I have an 800 appointment with General Carson." The guard looked at her ID. It showed her rank as captain. It showed her name. It showed that she worked for the Department of Defense, but it didn't show her clearance level. Security clearances weren't on military ID cards. They were in a separate system that only security personnel had access to. "General Carson," the guard said, and there was something skeptical in his tone. "Do you work for General Carson?" "I have an appointment with him," Alex said patiently. "I'm briefing him on a project." The guard looked at her uniform. It was pressed and neat. Her insignia was correct. She looked like what a captain should look like. But something in the guard's demeanor suggested that he didn't believe her. "Let me check with the desk," the guard said. He picked up his phone and called inside the base. Alex watched as he talked to someone. His expression didn't change. He was trying to verify something. After a moment, he hung up and came back to her car. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," the guard said. "I need to do a more thorough security check." Alex felt irritation rise in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She understood that security was important. She understood that the guards were doing their job, but she was running late. The briefing was in 13 minutes. She didn't have time for a thorough security check. "Is there a problem?" she asked, stepping out of the car. "No problem," the guard said. "Just procedure. We need to verify your appointment." As Alex was standing beside her car, another guard approached. This one was older, maybe in his late 30s, with the bearing of someone who'd been doing this job for years. He was a sergeant. His name tag said Rodriguez. "Captain Mitchell," he said, looking at her ID. "Yes," Alex said. "You don't look like a typical officer," Sergeant Rodriguez said. His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind, but it was clear what he meant. She didn't fit the image that he had in his mind of what a military officer should look like. Alex was a woman. She was also, by heritage, Latina. In her experience, both of those things sometimes made people doubt whether she really was who she claimed to be. "I'm a cybersecurity officer," Alex said. "I work in communications technology. I know I don't fit the typical combat officer profile, but I assure you, I am who I claim to be." "I'm sure you are," Sergeant Rodriguez said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was not, in fact, sure of that. "But I'm going to need you to walk inside with me. We need to verify your appointment through a different system." Alex wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that she was about to be late for the most important briefing of her career. But she knew that arguing would only slow things down, so she followed Sergeant Rodriguez inside. Inside the guard booth, there was a computer terminal. Sergeant Rodriguez typed something into it. He was accessing a database that had information about who was supposed to be on base. He searched for her name, and then his expression changed. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Alex, then he looked back at the screen. "Well," he said, and there was something like shame in his voice, "I owe you an apology, Captain." "What is it?" Alex asked. "Your clearance level," he said, turning the screen slightly so she could see it. "I've never seen a clearance at that level before. That's pretty high up there." Alex didn't confirm or deny anything about her clearance. Discussing clearance levels was itself a security issue. But the fact that Sergeant Rodriguez had looked at the system and seen something that made him understand the scope of her position was clear. "Am I cleared?" Alex asked simply. "More than cleared," Sergeant Rodriguez said. He stood up. "I'm very sorry for the delay, Captain. You're good to go." But as Alex turned to leave, there was something else in Sergeant Rodriguez's demeanor, something different. He wasn't just letting her through now. He was respectful. He was deferential. He was treating her the way you treat someone who has real authority. The problem was that he'd been disrespectful before he understood her clearance level. He'd doubted her. He'd questioned her. He'd treated her like she might be an imposter simply because she didn't fit his image of what a military officer should look like. And that bothered Alex more than she wanted to admit. She made it to her briefing with 2 minutes to spare. General James Carson was already in the secure room, along with 2 other high-ranking officers. Alex set up her presentation materials and began her briefing. For the next 90 minutes, she walked them through the cyber threat. She explained the threat actors. She explained the sophistication of the attack. She explained the vulnerability they'd identified. And most importantly, she explained the solution she'd developed to neutralize the threat. When she finished, General Carson stood up and extended his hand. "That was excellent work, Captain," he said. "This is exactly what we needed. This is going to save our military infrastructure from serious damage. You should be very proud." "Thank you, sir," Alex said. "I'm going to be recommending you for a commendation," General Carson said. "This kind of work deserves recognition." But as Alex walked out of the secure briefing room and made her way back to her office, she couldn't stop thinking about the moment at the gate. She couldn't stop thinking about the way the guards had looked at her before they understood her clearance level. She couldn't stop thinking about how quickly things had changed once they understood that she had real authority. It was a small moment. It was a moment that most people would have forgotten within an hour. But for Alex, it was a moment that crystallized something she'd been thinking about for her entire military career. She had real power. She had real authority. She had real importance, but people couldn't see that just by looking at her. They had to be told. They had to be shown. And she was tired of having to be shown. That evening, she called her best friend, Captain Daniel Torres, who worked in the same building. "You won't believe what happened at the gate this morning," Alex said. She told him the story, about the guards doubting her, about Sergeant Rodriguez treating her like she might be an imposter, about the moment when everything changed once he saw her clearance level. "That's typical," Daniel said. "People see what they expect to see. They don't see you. They see their preconceived notion of what a military officer looks like, and when you don't fit that, they doubt you." "It shouldn't be that way," Alex said. "I've earned my position. I've earned my clearance. I've earned the right to be here. I shouldn't have to prove it to a guard at the gate." "You're right," Daniel said. "But that's the world we live in. People make snap judgments based on what they see. And what they see when they look at you is a woman. They see someone who doesn't fit the stereotype of military leadership, so they doubt." Alex listened to what Daniel was saying, and she knew he was right. But knowing he was right didn't make her feel any better about it. What she didn't know was that her experience at the gate had been witnessed by someone unexpected, someone who was in a position to do something about it, someone who was about to walk into her life and change everything. 3 weeks after the gate incident, Alex received a phone call from General Patricia Richardson. General Richardson was one of the highest-ranking women in the military. She was the deputy commander of United States Cyber Command. She was extremely powerful. She was also extremely selective about what she did with her time and attention. "Captain Mitchell," General Richardson said without preamble, "I've been reviewing your work. I've been very impressed." "Thank you, ma'am," Alex said, not sure where this was going. "I've also been reading some reports about incidents at the base gate," General Richardson said. "Reports from Sergeant Rodriguez. Reports about the way you were treated when you arrived for your briefing with General Carson." Alex felt her stomach drop. She hadn't filed a complaint. She hadn't reported the incident to anyone. How did General Richardson know about it? "Ma'am, I didn't." "Sergeant Rodriguez filed a report," General Richardson interrupted. "He said he was concerned that he'd engaged in discriminatory behavior based on appearance. He said he'd questioned your right to be on base because you didn't fit his expectations of what a military officer should look like. He wanted to make sure that was reported and handled properly. Oh, Alex said, surprised. She hadn't expected Sergeant Rodriguez to do that. What happened at the gate, General Richardson said, is not acceptable. It's also not unique. It's part of a larger pattern of women in the military, particularly women of color, being questioned about their authority and their right to be in positions of power. I'm calling because I want to do something about that pattern. What do you mean? Alex asked. I mean that I want you to come work for me, General Richardson said. I want you to leave your current position and join my team at Cyber Command Headquarters. I want you working on high-level strategic initiatives, and I want you to help me change the culture of how women and minorities are treated in the military. Alex's mind was reeling. This was a massive opportunity. This was a career-changing opportunity, but it was also terrifying. General Richardson, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for. You're qualified, General Richardson said firmly. I wouldn't be offering if you weren't. What you are is uncertain about yourself. What you are is doubting whether you deserve this opportunity because someone in uniform made you doubt. And I'm here to tell you that you deserve it. More than that, the military needs people like you in positions of power. So I'm asking, will you join my team? Alex thought about the gate. She thought about Sergeant Rodriguez and the Lance Corporal looking at her like she might be an imposter. She thought about how quickly that changed once they understood who she was. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll join your team. Good, General Richardson said. I'm going to have orders cut for you to transfer. You'll start in 1 month. In that time, I want you to think about what you want to accomplish. What kind of change do you want to see? After they hung up, Alex sat in her apartment, trying to process what had just happened. She just accepted a position that would essentially rocket her career into the stratosphere. She just accepted a position that would put her in direct contact with the highest levels of military leadership. She just accepted a position that was going to require her to be visible in ways she'd never been visible before. And it was all because of what had happened at the gate. 1 month later, Alex arrived at Cyber Command Headquarters for her first day. She was no longer a captain working on classified projects that no one knew about. She was now a captain working directly for a general on initiatives that would shape military strategy. General Richardson gave her a formal office. Not a cubicle, not a shared workspace, a real office with her name on the door. Captain Alexandra Mitchell, deputy to the general. This office used to belong to a colonel, General Richardson said. I'm breaking tradition. I don't care about your current rank. I care about your capability. You're going to work here and you're going to do great things. For the first 3 months, Alex worked on understanding the strategic landscape. She attended briefings at the highest levels of the Pentagon. She met with generals and admirals. She participated in strategic planning meetings where military policy was decided. And then General Richardson gave her an assignment. I want you to lead a project, General Richardson said. I want you to develop a program that identifies and removes barriers to advancement for women and minorities in military cybersecurity. I want you to look at hearing practices. I want you to look at promotion practices. I want you to look at how women and minorities are treated once they're already in the military, and I want you to develop recommendations for change. That's a big scope, Alex said. It is, General Richardson agreed. But I think you're the right person for it. You've lived it. You understand the problem from the inside. Alex threw herself into the work. She interviewed hundreds of people. She reviewed hearing data. She reviewed promotion data. She looked at retention rates. She looked at attrition rates. She looked at everything she could think of that might shed light on why women and minorities weren't advancing in cybersecurity at the same rate as men. What she found was both expected and devastating. Women and minorities faced barriers at every stage. They were less likely to be hired. They were less likely to be promoted. They were more likely to face discrimination. They were more likely to leave the military because they didn't feel like they belonged. And one of the places where those barriers were most obvious was at the foundational level, at basic training, at junior officer schools, at places where young people first entered the military and decided whether they wanted to stay. Alex developed a comprehensive report. She included data. She included interviews. She included recommendations. She included a plan for systemic change. When she presented it to General Richardson, The general read through it carefully, taking notes, asking questions. "This is excellent," General Richardson said when she finished. "This is exactly what I hoped you would produce. Now, here's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to take this to the Secretary of Defense. I'm going to recommend that we implement these changes across the entire military cybersecurity apparatus. But before I do that, I want you to do something." "What?" Alex asked. "I want you to give a presentation on this report to the senior leadership of the military. I want you to stand in front of generals and admirals and present what you've found. I want you to make the case for why this matters." Alex felt her stomach tighten. "General Richardson, I'm just a captain. These are very senior officers. I'm not sure I'm—" "You're sure you're not ready?" General Richardson said, and there was something knowingly firm in her voice. "But you are ready, and you're going to do this. Because if this report comes from me, it's just one general advocating for change. But if it comes from you, a woman who has lived through these barriers, a woman who has the data and the expertise to back up what she's saying, then it becomes real. Then it becomes something people have to listen to." A week later, Alex stood in front of 40 of the highest-ranking military officers in the country. She was wearing her dress uniform. Her captain's insignia gleamed. She looked out at the room full of generals and admirals, and she felt terrified. But then she thought about the gate. She thought about Sergeant Rodriguez. She thought about what it had felt like to be doubted, and she started talking. She talked about the data. She talked about what it meant. She talked about the young women and minorities who were leaving the military because they didn't feel like they belonged. She talked about the talent that was being lost because of discrimination and barriers. She talked about what it would mean for military readiness if they fixed those problems. "The military cybersecurity apparatus," she said, "is going to be the backbone of American defense in the 21st century. We're not going to be able to handle the threats we're facing if we're only drawing from half of the population. We need women. We need minorities. We need diversity, not because it's politically correct, but because it's militarily necessary." When she finished, there was silence in the room. Then, slowly, people began to stand. The generals and admirals stood. They applauded. It wasn't polite applause. It was the kind of applause you give when someone has said something you needed to hear. Admiral James Richardson, the highest-ranking officer in Cyber Command, approached her after the presentation. "That was extraordinary," he said. "That was exactly what we needed to hear. General Richardson is right. This kind of advocacy needs to come from people who have lived it. Thank you for doing this." 2 months after Alex's presentation, the Secretary of Defense made an announcement. The military was implementing a comprehensive new initiative aimed at removing barriers to advancement for women and minorities in cybersecurity. The initiative was based on research conducted by Captain Alexandra Mitchell. The initiative was going to be called the Mitchell Initiative, in her honor. The announcement went public. It was reported in major news outlets. Alex's name was in the headlines. Her work was being recognized not just within military circles, but by the public. But more than that, the announcement included something unexpected. The Secretary of Defense announced that Alex was being promoted. She was being promoted directly to major. She was being promoted over several senior captains who would normally have been next in line for the promotion. The reason? Excellence and service in the development of strategic initiatives that would shape military readiness. It was unprecedented. Captain to major promotions usually happened within a specific timeline. They didn't happen based on individual achievement outside of normal channels, but the Secretary of Defense was making an exception. When Alex received the notification, she felt something like vertigo. She'd started her military career dreaming of making major by the time she was in her late 30s. She was 32. She was going to make major in a ceremony at the Pentagon, attended by the Secretary of Defense. General Richardson called her before the promotion ceremony. "I wanted you to hear from me first," the general said. "I recommended this promotion. You earned it. You earned it through your work. You earned it through your willingness to stand up and advocate for change. I wanted you to know that." "Thank you," Alex said, and her voice was shaking slightly. "There's something else I want you to know," General Richardson continued. "In 3 weeks, I'm announcing my retirement from active duty. I'm going to be stepping down as Deputy Commander of Cyber Command, and I'm recommending that you be considered for my position." Alex thought she'd heard wrong. "General Richardson, you can't mean." "I can and I do," the general said. "You can't have the position immediately. You'll need time to establish yourself at a higher rank, but I'm making the recommendation, and I'm confident that it will be accepted. In 5 years, you're going to be a brigadier general in charge of strategic cybersecurity initiatives for the entire United States military. That's my prediction, that's my recommendation, and that's what I believe you're capable of. The promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense was there. General Richardson was there. Alex stood in dress uniform as she received her major's insignia. The applause was genuine and sustained. After the ceremony, as Alex was standing with General Richardson, someone unexpected approached them. It was Sergeant Rodriguez, the guard from the gate. "Major Mitchell," he said, using her new rank, saluting. "Congratulations on your promotion." "Thank you, Sergeant," Alex said. "I wanted you to know," Sergeant Rodriguez continued, "that I watched your presentation. General Richardson sent it to all the base security personnel. It made me think about how I treat people when they come through the gate. It made me think about my assumptions. And I want you to know that I'm recommitting to treating everyone with equal respect, regardless of what they look like." After Sergeant Rodriguez left, General Richardson said something to Alex that she would remember for the rest of her life. "Do you understand now?" the general asked. "Do you understand why what happened at the gate mattered? That one moment of disrespect turned into something that changed how hundreds of military personnel treat women and minorities. That one moment of you refusing to accept being doubted turned into systemic change." 5 years later, Major Alexandra Mitchell was indeed promoted to brigadier general. She was one of the youngest brigadier generals in the military. She was also one of the few women in that rank in cybersecurity. She took over General Richardson's position as Deputy Commander of Cybersecurity Command, and she immediately set about expanding the Mitchell Initiative. She made it bigger. She made it more comprehensive. She expanded it to include not just cybersecurity, but all of military command structure. The results were dramatic. The number of women and minorities being recruited into military cybersecurity increased by 40% in the first year. The retention rate for women and minorities increased by 30%. The promotion rate increased by 50%. The military was becoming more diverse, and it was becoming stronger because of that diversity. 10 years after the day at the gate, Brigadier General Alexandra Mitchell was invited to speak at the military academy at West Point. She was invited to speak to cadets about leadership and what it meant to break barriers. She stood in front of about 2,000 young military officers in training, and she told them the story of the gate. "There was a moment in my career," she said, "when I was mocked, when I was questioned, when I was doubted simply because I didn't look like what people expected a military officer to look like. In that moment, I had a choice. I could accept the doubt, or I could stand up and refuse to accept it." She paused, looking out at the cadets. "I chose to stand up, not in an angry way, not in a confrontational way, but I chose to use what happened to me as motivation to change the system that had allowed it to happen in the first place. And when I did that, everything changed, for me, and eventually for thousands of other people." She continued, "I'm going to tell you something that I didn't understand when I was younger. Your identity is not something to apologize for. Your background is not something that makes you less qualified to lead. Your difference from the stereotypical leader is actually what makes you a better leader, because you see things differently. You think differently. You approach problems differently, and the military needs that." The speech was recorded and shared widely. It became a teaching tool in military academies. Young cadets watched it. Young officers watched it. And they understood something that previous generations hadn't understood, that breaking barriers wasn't just about one person's advancement. It was about changing systems so that those barriers didn't exist for anyone. 15 years after the Gate incident, General Alexandra Mitchell was offered a position as the commander of Cyber Command. She would be the first woman to hold that position. It was one of the most powerful military positions in the country. When she accepted, she did something unexpected. She requested a meeting with all the security personnel at the Fort Meade gate. She wanted to thank them. She wanted to acknowledge that one of them, Sergeant Rodriguez, had been willing to recognize his own bias and report it. At that meeting, she told the story of her first day. She talked about the doubt. She talked about the disrespect. She talked about how she'd channeled that into motivation for change. "I want to tell you," she said, looking at the security personnel, "that you are the first impression that people have of this base. You are the first interaction that people have with the military structure. and the respect you show them or the disrespect sets the tone for their entire experience. So I'm asking you to do one thing: treat everyone with equal respect. Assume the best of people. Don't make assumptions based on what they look like, because you never know who is walking through that gate. You never know what that person is capable of. She looked directly at Sergeant Rodriguez. Some of you will have the courage to recognize when you've made a mistake and to report it. And I want you to know that takes courage, and I want you to know that it matters. 20 years after the day at the gate, General Alexandra Mitchell retired from active duty. She'd served 38 years in the military. She'd risen from a woman who was mocked at a security gate to the commander of Cyber Command. She'd changed military policy. She'd changed military culture. She'd opened doors for thousands of women and minorities who would never have the opportunity she had. Her retirement ceremony was held at the Pentagon, and it was attended by military leaders from around the world. The Secretary of Defense spoke. The Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke. They talked about her legacy. They talked about how she'd changed the military. They talked about the women and minorities who had advanced because of her work. But when General Mitchell took the podium to speak, she didn't talk about her accomplishments. She talked about Sergeant Rodriguez. "There's a man named Sergeant Eduardo Rodriguez," she said, "who works at the security gate at Fort Meade. 20 years ago, he treated me with disrespect because I didn't fit his image of what a military officer should look like. I won't say it didn't hurt, because it did. But I will say that what happened next mattered more, because Sergeant Rodriguez had the courage to recognize his mistake. He had the courage to report it, and that one act of courage inspired me to fight for change." She looked out at the crowd. "That's what I want my legacy to be. Not that I achieved great things, but that I inspired other people to achieve great things. That I opened doors so that people who didn't fit the stereotype could walk through. That I changed a system that was broken. And that I did it with the help of people like Sergeant Rodriguez, who were willing to look at themselves and change." After her retirement, General Mitchell started a foundation called The Gate, dedicated to helping women and minorities navigate the barriers they faced in military and other leadership positions. The foundation provided mentorship, provided legal support, provided advocacy. It helped thousands of people. One day, a young woman came to General Mitchell's office. The woman was a junior officer, just starting her career. She was also mocked at the base gate because she didn't fit people's expectations of what a military officer should look like. "I don't know if I can do this," the young woman said. "I don't know if I belong here." General Mitchell looked at the young woman, and she saw herself. She saw all the women who had come before her. She saw all the women who would come after her. "You belong here," General Mitchell said. "You belong exactly as you are, and if anyone makes you doubt that, you come find me. Because I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that the next generation doesn't have to fight the battles that I fought." That was the real legacy, not the promotions, not the position at the top, but the door that had been held open so that others could walk through. The barrier that had been broken so that it couldn't stop anyone else. The moment at the gate that had been transformed from a moment of disrespect into a moment of profound change. Because sometimes, when you refuse to accept being doubted, when you refuse to accept being mocked, when you refuse to accept that you don't belong, that's when you change things. That's when you break barriers. That's when you open doors for thousands of people who will never know your name but whose lives will be better because you stood up. That was what happened that morning at the gate. A captain was mocked. A captain was doubted. And a captain decided that it wasn't going to happen again, not to her, and not to anyone who came after her. And that made all the difference.